With former RNC Communications Director Doug Heye, former Obama White House Deputy Chief of Staff Jim Messina, and Politico's White House reporter Eugene Daniels. So, Doug, let's start with you. You know pretty well that there's no love lost between McConnell and Rick Scott. It appears that the president has really succeeded here in causing a rift within the Republican Party.
Well, this rift isn't new. If we go back to the campaign, we saw the senatorial committee, which Rick Scott headed at the time, show some anger when Mitch McConnell said the very right and obvious thing that we have a problem of candidate quality. Herschel Walker being a great example of that, the most prominent example. They were upset with that. McConnell also said, we don't want to go down this road of talking about Social Security and potentially cutting it and so forth, which was the Scott plan. So here we are a year later, and we're still talking about these things. And it's why Mitch McConnell, when he says a sentence, it's paragraphs of what other politicians would say. This fight is going to continue because McConnell is trying to warn Republicans, as he has for a year now, don't go down this road. Republicans ignore or challenge McConnell at their own peril. And the White House is enjoying this. Andrew Bates is the Deputy Communications Director at the White House, or Deputy Press Secretary from Louisville, North Carolina, my hometown. And he tweeted in trolling today that they would love to book Rick Scott or some other Republican senators to talk about this. I'm anti-trolling, but that's good trolling.
So Jim Messina, the Washington Post pointing out that the implications of this debate for 2024, they're talking about Trump's White House budget cuts that included cuts to Social Security and Medicare, and some form of these cuts embraced by Ron DeSantis, potential 2024 candidate, Mike Pence, potential 2024 candidate, and Nikki Haley, who's probably going to announce next week. I have to ask the question, though, is there any real space for a substantive debate about entitlement spending? Because you can be opposed to cuts, but the solvency of these programs are really an open question right now.
Not in the middle of this political maelstrom. I mean, Ali had it exactly right. This isn't just about Rick Scott. This is, the Republican Party is going to have to deal with this now that they're in charge of the House. The House ideological leader, Jim Jordan, has called for a similar kind of thing here. 70% of Americans oppose these cuts. One of the biggest testing lines from the Biden speech in focus groups that I saw was him saying Social Security and Medicare should be off the table. And so in the middle of the presidential election cycle that is already kicking off, as you just said, this is a real problem. And I agree with Doug, to have the Republicans fighting with each other is just an absolute win for the Democrats. And it sets it up to be exactly what Joe Biden wants, which is the next 2 years having the Republicans continue to propose this, which they will in their next budget, and have him just go straight at it with these swing voters.
Well, Eugene, that's not to say that Joe Biden has no problems. Recent polling shows Democrats are less excited about Biden running for re-election. And the big concern among many is that he's just too old. The president, of course, dismissed the polls in an interview with Telemundo. I want you to listen to that first.
Do you know any polling that's accurate these days? You all told me that there's no way we were going to do well in this off-year election. I told you from the beginning we were going to do well. Y'all told me I couldn't win the general election. We did well. I feel good about where we are. I feel good about the way things are, and I feel good about the reception I get.
The president's age is a problem. He's 80 now. He would be 86 at the end of his presidency should he be reelected. Eugene, it's not just Republicans skeptical of this. The polling shows Democrats are as well. Has he changed any Democratic minds or gotten the base excited about his potential reelection bid?
No to the second question, but to that first question, some folks that I talked to with before the State of the Union, they watched the State of the Union. They felt like President Biden was on his toes and not on his heels. They felt like this was someone who looked a little younger than he has in the past. But I will say, age is going to be an issue for Joe Biden. We are going to continue to talk about it. Democrats are going to whisper about it, and Republicans, especially if they pick anyone other than Donald Trump, who's 76 himself, will definitely hammer on that. We saw that with Governor Huckabee Sanders the other day. But I will say, for President Biden, there's no other alternative at this point, right? When you talk to Democrats and they talk about his age, they say, oh, I'm not really excited about Biden running. I'm definitely not excited about a possible Biden versus Trump. The question is, okay, so then who's next? Who should be the nominee? And they typically, when I talk to them, I don't know about you guys, but they don't have an answer, right? They know that Joe Biden, especially if it's Donald Trump, probably has the best chance at beating him. And also, and more importantly, in the primary, Joe Biden is going to get the black vote, right? We saw that in 2020. And if you cannot get the black vote in the Democratic primary, you cannot win the nomination. So whether or not they want him, he's probably going to be the nominee if he chooses to run.
Jim, Eugene raises such a great point. If it's not Joe Biden, who is it? Is that one of the problems Democrats can face, that even though there may not be excitement for Biden, there's no clear alternative?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think over 20 candidates would announce the next day. And if you look at history, except for 1988, when the incumbent president doesn't run, the other party usually wins. And then the other, to Eugene's point, which is exactly right, if Joe Biden has a primary, he would lose the general election. The two presidents of my lifetime who have had primaries, Carter and the first Bush, lost the general election. Democrats are absolutely focused on winning and holding the White House. And the way to do that is line up behind Joe Biden. And that's what the party is going to do.
What about Republicans, Doug? Would they like to see Joe Biden run for re-election or someone else?
They'd like to see Biden, but they'd also like to see some division within Democrats. If he's challenged, that weakens Biden, as we saw with Ted Kennedy challenging Jimmy Carter in 1979, 1980. Republicans want that, but they're going to continue to talk about generational change. That means two people who are in their 70s or 80s, Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk generational change if he's at the top of the ticket.
Absolutely.
Right, okay. Doug Heye, Jim Messina, Eugene Daniels, thank you all. I appreciate it.